I stood on the veranda of the seaside villa, the salty wind tangling my hair as I gripped my phone tighter than I realized. My father's name flashed across the screen, and I hesitated before answering. The moment I pressed it to my ear, his voice came heavy with something that already told me I wouldn't like what I was about to hear. "Margaret," he began, as though trying to soften me before the blow. "I thought you'd understand. Diana needed money. If we didn't pay off her debt, things could have gotten dangerous. It's only natural for family to help each other." I felt my chest tighten. That tone, that excuse, I had heard it all my life. And I knew what it meant. "You went ahead and did whatever you wanted, didn't you?" My voice shook, not because I doubted, but because I knew deep down that once again my parents had chosen my younger sister over me. The pattern was so familiar, it was almost predictable, and yet the wound was just as sharp as ever. My earliest memories were filled with moments where Diana's wants outweighed my existence. When I was 5, my parents gave me a shiny red bicycle for my birthday. For a moment, I had been the happiest child alive. But when Diana, just 3 years old, then reached for the handlebars with greedy curiosity, my father had laughed and said, "You're the big sister, Margaret. Let her have it." Days later, the bicycle was no longer mine, it was hers. My protests went unheard, dismissed with a wave of the hand and words that carved into my young heart. "Don't be difficult." It wasn't just toys. It was my life. When I received a new pencil case at the start of elementary school, Diana wanted it. And soon enough, I was given something else plain dull unwanted while she paraded with mine. When I asked to join swimming lessons, I was told no, because Diana's piano and ballet classes already cost too much. Money was always abundant for her, but scarce for me. When I came first in a race, they didn't even notice Diana had tripped and scraped her knee, so their attention was hers. When I gave a speech as class president, my parents didn't show up, they were at Diana's event. And slowly as the years passed, I stopped even telling them about my achievements. Because what was the point? The pattern only worsened. By high school, I had learned to swallow my pride and hide my dreams. I worked harder than anyone else in my class, pouring myself into my studies, and when the acceptance letter to my first choice university arrived, I thought just for a moment that maybe they would finally see me. But that night at dinner, when I timidly shared the news, my mother smiled faintly, more interested in Diana's mock exam results. Plates filled with Diana's favorite dishes were placed on the table as though my acceptance was nothing more than background noise. The silence and acknowledgement of my effort hurt more than if they had insulted me directly. By the time I entered university, I had given up trying to be their daughter. I existed in the house, but my soul was already elsewhere. And then, by chance, I met Ken. He was the captain of the windsurfing club, older patient, and everything my parents were not. On the first day of practice, I fell into the water so many times that my body ached. My throat burned from swallowing seawater, and humiliation pricked at my eyes. Just when I thought of giving up, Ken extended his hand and said, "Everyone starts like this." I fell all day when I was a freshman, too. It was the first time someone had seen me fail and offered kindness instead of criticism. Little by little, Ken and I grew close. He cheered when I finally balanced on the waves, his smile radiant with pride I had never received from my parents. His encouragement seeped into me, repairing cracks I thought would always remain. Months later, we were inseparable. When I graduated, we started a small business together importing marine sports equipment. My parents scoffed, of course. "It's unstable. You should get a real job. You need to think of Diana, too." Their words no longer controlled me, but they stung all the same. We struggled, yes. We juggled debts, worked odd jobs, fought rejection after rejection. But eventually, through sheer persistence, we made it. Our turning point came with a contract from a small Australian manufacturer, and that was the seed from which everything grew. Years later, we stood hand in hand on the balcony of a seaside villa, our villa bought with our sweat, our tears, our endless faith in each other. It was more than a house. It was a symbol. On our first night there, we sat under the stars, waves crashing softly below, and Ken said, "Margaret, let's grow old together here." And I believed him. I still do. But that morning, with my father's voice on the line, all of that was shattered. He spoke casually at first, as though announcing something mundane. "About your vacation home, I've already sold it. The ownership transfer will take place next month." The words didn't make sense at first. My heart pounded as if I had misheard. "Sold? What are you talking about?" "Diana is in trouble," he said, his tone teetering between excuse and justification. "She made a bad investment and owes $200,000. We had to help her. We had no choice." And there it was again. Diana's mess, my sacrifice. Always the same equation. Rage surged within me, hotter than I had ever felt. That's Diana's problem. "You had no right to touch my home, our home. How did you even manage to proceed with the sale?" My father hesitated, his voice faltering. "I already had your signatures. The documents were prepared. You forgot them." My knees nearly buckled. They had forged my name. My parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, had committed fraud against me for Diana. "No," I whispered, then louder, firmer. "No, this is a crime. An unauthorized sale is fraud. I'm calling the police." I heard him gasp. "The police? Don't be ridiculous. How can you bring a family matter outside?" But this wasn't just a family matter. This was betrayal. This was theft. This was the final proof of where I stood in their hearts nowhere. When I hung up, the silence around me felt suffocating. The waves kept crashing against the shore, indifferent to my pain. I pressed my palms against the balcony railing until my fingers ached. For years I had endured their favoritism, their neglect, their blindness to me. But this was unforgivable. Ken called shortly after. His voice was steady, grounding me. "I heard from the buyer they're one of my old friends. When I explained, they backed out. The sale's been called off." Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by despair when he added, "The police found forged documents. Your parents, they planned this." That night when Ken arrived, I collapsed in his arms, the tears I had held back finally pouring out. Why, I sobbed. Why would they do this? Do they think they can justify anything if it's for Diana? Ken stroked my hair, whispering, "You've done nothing wrong. I'm proud of you for standing your ground." His words healed something inside me even as my world fell apart. But the storm was only beginning. The following morning, the police investigation was already underway. My phone buzzed constantly, calls from unknown numbers, messages I didn't open, and repeated attempts from my mother. I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was there left to say? That I was the ungrateful daughter for refusing to let them commit fraud in my name. That Diana was blameless as always, and I should simply accept being sacrificed. The truth was too heavy to ignore. My parents had crossed a line that could never be undone. Their actions weren't just misguided love for my sister, they were a betrayal so deep it pierced through every scar they had ever left on me. When Ken returned from work that evening, he found me sitting on the deck, staring blankly at the horizon, where the ocean met the sky. The colors of sunset were painted in gold and crimson, but all I felt was gray. He placed a warm cup of tea beside me and sat without a word. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he reached for my hand, his thumb tracing slow circles against my skin. "We'll get through this," he said quietly. "Together." That word "together" anchored me when everything else felt like it was slipping away. Days passed, and with them came revelations that left me breathless. The police uncovered just how meticulously my parents had planned the attempted sale. They had forged not only my signature, but Ken's as well, claiming to the agent that we were relocating overseas and could no longer manage the property. They had even spread rumors in the neighborhood saying we had fallen into debt and were forcing them to clean up after us. My own mother willing to soil my name just to shield Diana. The more I learned, the more a hollow ache filled my chest. It wasn't just about money, it was about truth. It was about realizing that the bond I had hoped existed between us as family had never been real. One night as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Diana herself. Against my better judgment, I answered. "How could you do this?" she snapped before I could speak. "Turning our parents over to the police. That's cruel. They're just trying to help me." I laughed bitterly, though it sounded more like a sob. "Cruel Diana. Do you even hear yourself?" They tried to sell the home Ken and I worked years for just to cover your debt. That's not helping. That's a crime. You're so heartless, she said, her voice thick with practiced tears. I'm really struggling, sis. We're family. You should be helping me, not making things worse. For a moment, I was that little girl again, accused of being selfish, told to share what was mine because Diana wanted it. But I wasn't that girl anymore. No, I said firmly. It's time you start taking responsibility for your own actions. I'm done cleaning up after you. And I hung up my hands, trembling. The call left me drained. Since childhood, I had played the role they forced on me, the scapegoat, the one who sacrificed, the one who quietly endured. And where had it led Diana, reckless and entitled, and my parents blind and complicit? They hadn't just spoiled her, they had destroyed her ability to stand on her own. The truth was, this wasn't the first time Diana had racked up debt. It started small, a few $1,000s from consumer loans during her first year of college, spent on luxury shopping trips with friends. My parents paid it off without hesitation, brushing it aside as youthful mistakes. Then came the tuition money she misused on vacations and clothes, another $30,000 covered by my father's savings. Later, it was an older boyfriend who lured her into an investment scheme that cost nearly $40,000 more. Each time my parents dug deeper into their own pockets, each time making excuses. She's just inexperienced. She doesn't understand money yet. She's delicate. I had warned them. I had begged them to stop enabling her. But they never listened. To them, Diana was a fragile child who needed protection, while I was the strong one who needed nothing. But the truth was, their so-called protection was killing her. It stripped her of accountability, of growth, of reality. And now here we were, 200,000 in debt, and my parents desperate enough to commit fraud in my name. Ken held me one night as I cried into his shoulder, whispering words I didn't know I needed to hear. They can't take what we've built. Not unless we let them. And I won't let them, Margaret. Neither should you. The police pressed charges and my parents were summoned for questioning. My mother's voice shook when she confessed Diana's involvement, insisting through tears that Diana wasn't to blame. She's not as smart as Margaret, she told the officer. She was tricked. She's just a poor girl. Even the officer reportedly fell silent at her words. My stomach churned with a mix of fury and grief. How could she defend her like this, even now? Even after everything? The days blurred together. My parents' calls became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Relatives reached out, some sympathetic, others accusing me of being cold-hearted for involving the police. They're your parents. Can't you forgive them? But forgiveness, I realized, was not always noble. Sometimes forgiveness only enabled more wrongdoing. 1 week later, I stood with Ken on the deck watching the ocean turn violet under the setting sun. He squeezed my hand. Remember the night we first saw this place? I nodded, remembering the peeling paint, the worn floorboards, and how my heart had leapt at the thought of restoring it together. We made it ours, I whispered. Every nail, every coat of paint, every memory. No one can take that from us, he said, his gaze steady. Tears welled in my eyes. My relationship with my parents may never return to what it once was. But maybe that was okay. Because what it once was had always been broken. Still, the ache didn't fade. Late at night, lying awake, I found myself wondering if I had been too harsh. If maybe, just maybe, I should have given them one more chance. But then I remembered the forged documents, the rumors they spread, the home they tried to steal, and the doubt was replaced by resolve. It wasn't me who had abandoned them. It was them who had abandoned me long ago every time they chose Diana over me. The investigation continued, peeling back layers I hadn't even known existed. The fraud wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. It had been in the works for months. My parents had planned every step, carefully crafting lies to present to the realtor, rehearsing their story, covering every trace except one. They hadn't counted on the buyer being a friend of Ken's. They hadn't counted on their betrayal being exposed so quickly. When the official report came detailing the lengths they had gone to, I felt something inside me shatter. They hadn't just stumbled into this. They had chosen it, chosen to betray me, chosen to see me as nothing more than a means to fix Diana's mistakes. One evening, I went for a walk along the shoreline. The waves licked at my feet cold and biting, and I let the salt sting my skin. I thought of my parents as they once were, faces young and strong voices that should have been my comfort. And then I thought of them as they were now desperate and broken, clinging to a daughter who had never learned to stand. A sob rose in my throat, but I swallowed it back. I whispered into the wind enough. For the first time in my life, I wasn't saying it to them. I was saying it to myself. Enough of the guilt, enough of the sacrifice, enough of being invisible. Because I was done. The weeks after my parents' attempted fraud felt like a blur, a fog of disbelief that clung to me no matter how much I tried to shake it off. The police investigation stretched on, and every day brought new fragments of truth that pierced me in ways I hadn't expected. I learned how carefully they had prepared the sale, how my own mother had sat in her kitchen with papers spread out before her, imitating my signature stroke by stroke. I imagined her hunched over lips pressed together in concentration, while my father rehearsed the lies he would tell the realtor. They weren't desperate in the moment. They weren't forced by circumstance. They had chosen betrayal step by step long before I even picked up that phone call on the veranda. And that was what broke me. One morning, the phone rang again. The caller ID froze my chest. It was Diana. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Do you hate me that much?" she asked. Her voice trembled, but not with remorse, with accusation. I gripped the phone tighter. "This isn't about hate. This is about the truth. You racked up debts, Diana. You let them risk everything for you. You could have helped me," she snapped. "You should have helped me. Isn't that what family does?" Something inside me snapped. Family doesn't mean sacrificing one child to feed the other's mistakes. Family doesn't mean stealing from me because you can't grow up. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. For once, I wanted her to hear me. There was silence on the other end, followed by a soft, almost mocking laugh. "You've always been jealous. Admit it. You can't stand that they love me more." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, not because I believed them, but because deep down I knew she was right. They had loved her more. Or at least they convinced themselves they did. And I had spent my whole life trying to compete with a game I could never win. I hung up before she could say another word. My hands shook as I placed the phone on the table. I didn't want her poison seeping any further into me. Ken found me in tears later that night, my face buried in my hands. He knelt beside me, pulling me into his arms. "Don't let her break you," he whispered. "Don't let them break you. You've come too far." But the truth was, Diana's words lingered. They burrowed into the cracks of my heart, whispering in the quiet hours of the night. "Maybe they loved her more because you weren't worth loving. Maybe you were always defective." I hated myself for thinking it, but the thoughts wouldn't leave. The police continued to dig deeper, and soon the full scale of Diana's recklessness came to light. Her debts stretched back years, student loans wasted on shopping sprees, tuition money funneled into trips with friends, thousands thrown into get-rich-quick schemes pitched by boyfriends and strangers. Each time my parents had rushed in to rescue her, emptying savings, selling land, and draining retirement funds. By the time the fraudulent investment scheme left her $200,000 in the red, they had nothing left. Nothing but my villa, my life. It made me sick, and yet when I heard from the investigators that my mother had broken down during questioning, sobbing as she insisted Diana wasn't to blame, I felt an ache so sharp it nearly doubled me over. Even now, I thought, even when their world is collapsing, they protect her. One evening, I sat with Ken on the deck, the ocean roaring louder than usual, as though the sea itself carried my turmoil. He placed his arm around my shoulders, warm and steady, and I leaned into him with the exhaustion of 1,000 unspoken words. "Maybe they never really saw me at all," I whispered. "Maybe I was just convenient, a body to work a name, to sign a scapegoat when things went wrong." Ken's voice was firm, his jaw tight with conviction. "No. You are not a scapegoat. You are not a mistake. You're the reason this house exists, the reason we built this life. You've carried more than anyone ever should, and you're still standing. That doesn't make you defective, Margaret. That makes you extraordinary." Tears stung my eyes, but this time they weren't just from pain. They were from the unfamiliar sensation of being seen, truly seen. Still, I couldn't escape the reality that my parents were now facing criminal charges. Relatives bombarded me with questions. Can't you drop it? Can't you forgive them? They're old. They're family. Each word was like a blade digging into my chest. Why was the burden always mine to carry? Why was it always me who had to be the bigger person, the forgiving daughter, the one who bent until she broke? I started avoiding calls altogether. I couldn't take the guilt trips, the pleas, the accusations. I needed space. I needed to breathe. But Diana wasn't finished with me. One night, as I walked through the city streets after a late meeting, my phone buzzed with a message from her. "This is all your fault. You ruined everything. If you had just let them sell the villa, no one would have gotten hurt." I stopped in my tracks, staring at the screen as people bustled past me. My chest tightened, fury rising like a tide I couldn't contain. With trembling hands, I typed back, "No, Diana. What ruined everything is your selfishness. What ruined everything is their blindness. This isn't on me, it never was." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I had thrown her words back, refused to carry them inside me. Later, lying awake beside Ken, I whispered into the dark, "Maybe I'll never get their love. Maybe I'll never be enough for them." Ken squeezed my hand. "Then stop trying. You don't need their love to be enough." His words sank into me like seeds waiting to bloom. Still, the weight of it all pressed heavily on me. Some nights I dreamed of being little again, clutching that red bicycle on my birthday, begging to keep what was mine. I'd wake with tears streaming down my cheeks, realizing that little girl never had a chance. She had been robbed before she even understood what was happening. But now I was grown, now I had a voice, and I wasn't going to let them silence me anymore. The silence that followed my last message to Diana stretched into days, then weeks. I thought perhaps she had finally accepted what I had said, that maybe she had been forced to confront the truth she'd been running from her whole life. But I should have known better. People who build their lives on denial rarely surrender to reality. The police investigation moved steadily forward, and the report they eventually delivered to me left me cold. My parents had prepared everything, months of planning, forged documents, false statements, carefully crafted lies to cover their tracks. My mother, I read, had even told neighbors that Ken and I were drowning in debt, painting me as reckless so she could justify stealing from me. The same woman who once brushed my hair before school now smeared my name with rumors. The betrayal went so deep, it almost felt absurd. Almost. When I showed Ken the report, he read it quietly, his face expressionless. But when he looked up, there was a storm in his eyes. "Margaret," he said softly, "this isn't just about money or property. They've been erasing you your whole life. This." He tapped the paper with his finger. "This is just the proof of it." His words struck me harder than I expected. Erasing me. That was exactly what it was. From the bicycle on my 5th birthday to the villa in my 30s, it had all been the same message. You don't matter. She does. One evening, as autumn winds lashed against the windows, I sat curled on the couch, staring at the shadows dancing on the walls. I thought about how often I had longed for their approval, how desperately I had tried to earn it with grades, achievements, obedience, and how all along it had been futile. They had chosen their narrative long before I ever had the chance to prove myself. Diana was the fragile one, the delicate flower in need of care. And I was the strong one, the one who could endure anything. But strength, I realized, had only made me invisible. The phone rang again late one night. I almost didn't answer, but when I saw it was my mother, something in me hesitated. Against every ounce of reason, I picked up. Her voice was weary, trembling. "Margaret, please. Your father and I, we didn't mean for it to go this far. We just wanted to help Diana. She's not like you. She can't survive on her own." I closed my eyes, the old wound splitting open again. And I could. "Is that it? You thought I could survive without love, without support, without fairness. You thought I could survive being erased." She sobbed, the sound raw, but to me it felt hollow. "We only wanted to protect her." The words made me laugh bitterly, though it came out like a choke. By destroying me, there was silence. Only her quiet weeping filled the line. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No rage, no grief, just emptiness. "I can't forgive you," I whispered. "Not this time, maybe not ever." And I hung up. Ken found me on the balcony afterwards, staring out at the restless sea. He wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. "You don't owe them forgiveness," he said. "Not when they've never even asked for it the right way. Not when they don't understand what they've done." Still, the guilt gnawed at me. Could I really walk away from my parents forever? Could I cut them out of my life like a diseased root, even knowing they were the only parents I would ever have? These questions haunted me, echoing in my mind with no clear answer. The weeks turned colder, and with them came whispers from neighbors and relatives. My parents had lost nearly everything. My father resigned from his job under the weight of shame. My mother worked 3 part-time jobs at a warehouse, a food factory, and a supermarket checkout line. I imagined her bent over her hands, cracked from endless labor, her back aching under the weight of consequences she had chosen. Diana still hadn't changed, people said. She met another man, spoke of another investment scheme, convinced it was foolproof. And me, I should have felt vindicated. But instead, I felt tired. Tired of the cycle, tired of the pain, tired of being tethered to people who would never see me. One evening, Diana's name appeared in my inbox. The subject line was short, "Help me." Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Margaret, lend me $50,000. I promise this time I can turn everything around. You owe me this. You ruined our family." My hands trembled as I read the words, bile rising in my throat. Even now, even after everything, she still believed I was the villain. She still believed I was responsible for fixing the life she had shattered piece by piece. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent my parents the number of a debt counseling service, the most I could bring myself to offer. And then I shut my laptop and walked outside into the night air, the ocean roaring faintly in the distance. Ken joined me on the deck, his arms slipping naturally around my waist. "You did the right thing," he said simply. I leaned my head against his shoulder. "Then why does it feel like I'm the one who's breaking?" "Because you're human," he whispered. "Because you still wanted them to love you, and they never did it the way they should have." The tears came then, hot and unrelenting, and I let them fall. For the first time, I wasn't crying for them. I was crying for me, for the little girl with the red bicycle, for the teenager who studied alone, while her parents cheered for someone else, for the woman who built a life, only to have her parents try to steal it. I cried for every version of myself that had been denied love and for the part of me that still wanted it anyway. When the tears finally slowed, Ken kissed the top of my head. "You don't have to carry them anymore. Let them carry themselves." And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I believed him. The trial moved quickly after that. My parents were prosecuted, and those spared prison received suspended sentences. Their apology letters arrived in the mail, neatly folded and carefully written. I didn't read them. I threw them away unopened. Forgiveness wasn't owed, and I wouldn't let them pretend otherwise. A year later, the world had changed. My parents were still drowning in debt, living in a cramped apartment on the outskirts of town. My father worked nights as a security guard. My mother shuffled between jobs, and Diana drifted from one failed scheme to the next, still blaming everyone but herself. Relatives called me again and again, begging me to help, to show mercy. Each time my answer was the same: they'll have to solve their problems on their own. And though my heart ached, I meant it. Winter came, and with it the final report from the police. My parents' names were etched in black and white, charges of attempted fraud, a suspended sentence. Justice on paper had been served, but justice didn't heal the wounds that had festered for decades. I didn't see them for months. I heard about them through whispers, neighbors who pitied relatives, who scolded acquaintances, who gossiped. My father had collapsed once during a late-night security shift, worn down by exhaustion, but returned to work anyway because the bills never stopped coming. My mother, once so proud, was spotted at the supermarket checkout with a basket of discounted food, her frame thin and her hair gone white. And Diana still clung to her delusions, still blamed me. One afternoon, I ran into my mother at that very supermarket. She froze when she saw me, her face pale as though she had seen a ghost. I froze too, 1,000 words rising in my chest, but before I could speak, she turned and hurried away, her basket rattling in her grip. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty aisle, feeling the familiar ache return. She couldn't even look at me. Not as a daughter, not as anything. At the end of that year, an email arrived. Diana, Margaret lent me $50,000. I promise I can turn everything around. My hands shook as I read it. I didn't reply. I couldn't. There was no saving someone who refused to see themselves clearly. Instead, I sent my parents information on debt counseling, the last olive branch I would ever extend. It was the most mercy I could muster, and it would have to be enough. Why didn't we realize it sooner? Why didn't they see what they were doing to me? What they were doing to Diana? That question haunted me as I stood on the balcony of the villa, the ocean stretching endlessly before me. The waves crashed against the rocks with a rhythm as steady as the pain in my chest. Ken came to my side, his presence grounding me as always. He wrapped his arms around my shoulders and whispered, "You're not at fault. You never were." I leaned into him, letting his warmth seep into the cracks inside me. For so long I had carried guilt that didn't belong to me. Guilt for not being enough. Guilt for walking away. Guilt for speaking the truth. But in that moment, I felt the burden lighten, if only slightly. Ken had an idea then, one that made my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. What if we use this villa for something more, not just for us, but for others? A place of dreams, not lies. What if we opened it for charity events, for children who've never had a chance to experience the sea, the waves, the freedom you found here? His words pierced me in the best way possible. I thought of the lonely girl I once was, standing in the shadow of parents who never saw her. I thought of children out there now, waiting for someone to tell them they mattered. Tears filled my eyes as I nodded. "Yes," I whispered. "Let's do it." And so we did. We opened the villa for charity gatherings, teaching underprivileged children to surf, to ride the waves, to feel the power of the ocean beneath their feet. I watched their faces light up with joy, and for the first time in years, I felt light too. This villa, once nearly stolen, nearly lost, became not just a monument of my pain, but a sanctuary of hope. Sometimes when I stood on the deck with Ken watching the children play in the surf, I thought of my parents. I thought of Diana. And though anger still flickered inside me, I also felt something else: clarity. Their choices had destroyed them. My choices had saved me. I had always believed that family was supposed to mean love, protection, sacrifice. But my story had taught me that family could also mean betrayal, blindness, and cruelty. And yet, I had also learned something even more important. Family is not only blood. Family is who stands by you when the storm hits. Family is who believes in you when no one else does. Family is who builds dreams with you, not who tears them down. I had found that family in Ken, in the children who laughed on the waves, and myself. One evening, as the sun set in shades of gold and violet, Ken took my hand and whispered, "This is our life now, not theirs, ours." I looked at him, my heart swelling with a mixture of grief and gratitude, and realized he was right. The past would always linger, but it no longer defined me. I wasn't the girl begging for scraps of love anymore. I wasn't the scapegoat. I was Margaret. I was the woman who had survived betrayal, who had turned pain into purpose, who had reclaimed her voice. And maybe, just maybe, that was the sweetest revenge of all. If you've stayed with me until the end of my story, thank you. If any part of this touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe for more stories like mine and leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Did you find a way to rise above it? Because in the end, our stories aren't just scars, they can be bridges, and maybe by sharing them we can all feel a little less alone.